Highly esteemed friends, Poetry number 90 has the title, "The level of your respect for others is contingent on your worldview." Explained by the story, if you have been brought up to see yourself as the product of a tribe, wherever you go, you will see people from different tribes around you. If you have been brought up to see yourself as the product of a race, wherever you go, you will see people from different races around you. But if you have been brought up to see yourself simply as a child of God, wherever you go, you will see only fellow children of God around you. This quote is by Richard Anyagle Mensah, a Ghanaian writer. That was the observation of this writer. Mrs. Anderson would not bow so low as to let her precious daughter marry a black man over her dead body. Meanwhile, Priscilla wanted only Daniel, her Kenyan boyfriend and classmate in the university. In Daniel, Priscilla had seen a lot of potential, both in terms of character and capabilities. But her mother saw only a black man. As long as he was a black man, there was nothing to discuss. Eventually, Daniel finished his course and went back home, including hiding her passport. Mrs. Anderson placed every impediment in Priscilla's way to ensure she could not cross the seas to meet Daniel. Instead, she contrived and connived to arrange a marriage to the nearest white man's son. As much of a letdown as it is to idealists, sometimes such parents win the battle. Unlike Juliet, Priscilla succumbed in the end. She and Daniel had to concede that without her mother's support, the practicalities were too slim. She was not only passively averse to the marriage, but actively fighting it. Distance was not helping matters either. Worse, Daniel had yet to secure a job and found the going a bit too tough back in Kenya at that time. While promising to never lose touch, they agreed with breaking hearts to let go. So Priscilla married the nearest white man's son. Daniel also married some years later. Coming from a small constituency and considering his education, he stood elections and won. He was now the youngest senator in the Kenyan parliament. Priscilla, unfortunately, had only married sorrow. Apart from the soul-crushing agony within her that she could have no child because her man was incapable, he turned out to be a violent man. After 10 years of an abusive, fruitless marriage, she quit and faced her mother accusatorially now. There was Daniel, a true gentleman, married with children, and now a member of the Kenyan parliament. Just as gentle and handsome, just as brilliant and kind, he was able to trace her to her workplace when he was on a short visit to the States and credited her account with a handsome amount of money. Daniel had remained a gentleman throughout, the black whom her mother would not tolerate. Yet, her mother preferred that dangerous, impotent abuser for her, all just to promote cheap, illusory presumptions of fantasized race superiority. Mrs. Anderson was aware of the transformation in Daniel's life. She had seen him on television among the Kenyan delegation that had visited the White House. He had looked so important in the group that she couldn't help bragging to her neighbors that the Kenyan government spokesman wearing the gray suit in the newspapers was the black student who had wanted to marry Priscilla. And why did they not marry? She could not tell even her fellow whites that she had forbid it because she was now living among civilized whites who were far advanced beyond racism. Their children were married to blacks and no one cared. They were whites whose worldview was not as narrow as hers. They had traveled and studied far and wide and mingled with varied cultures worldwide. Some guessed the truth and said it with veiled sarcasm, that they hoped it was not on grounds of archaic race attitudes. Mrs. Anderson felt lonely and ashamed. It now dawned on her that her shameful inability to respect blacks stemmed from her narrow worldview. Tracing the source mentally, she realized that her narrow worldview was inculcated in her by her parents, who were incurable racists. In the community where she had grown up, people were generally racist and less cosmopolitan. Now, interacting more with the broader minds, she had realized that indeed it was all about one's orientation and experience to be civilized toward all. A broader worldview does widen one's level of respect for others. Friends, as can be deduced from the story, the level of our respect for others is contingent on our world view. Thank you.